If you own a 944 Turbo, this right here will cause you some heartache. If you're thinking of buying one, you'll want to find out what this is and what you're in for. So stick around and find out why some 944 Turbo owners wish they bought an S2 instead. Welcome back for another episode on my 1987 Porsche 944 Turbo. If you are on the East Coast, I hope you are all staying warm. It is basically a winter wonderland here in North Carolina. It is a cold one outside. Sexy beast. Get sexy! It is about 20 degrees. It doesn't look like we got a lot of snow, but it is definitely icy and not too safe to drive. So I am going to stay inside and get some work done on the 944 Turbo. I've got my portable heater going. It's doing a decent job. It is not absolutely freezing in here, but it could definitely be warmer. So I gotta toughen up. Yeah! So if you watched my previous episode, I installed my brand new Kroon wiring harness. And in this video, I'm going to continue with the reassembly, starting with this right here. And this is the heat shield for the air oil separator. And this part right here will normally turn what is a fairly straightforward job on a naturally aspirated 944 into an hours-long project on a turbo. So what is the big issue with this heat shield? Why does it make anything to do with the air oil separator so much more difficult? Why is it so hard to remove, replace the O-rings, etc.? And that's because on a naturally aspirated car, there is no turbo. And because there is no turbo, there is no downpipe. This is an aftermarket downpipe by Fabspeed, and it's got a rough texture to it because I had it coated by Jet Hot. This heat shield fits down in between, and you might think, no big deal. Somehow, I was able to get this out without removing the turbo. If you watch the very first episode in this series, I started to go through all the work of removing the turbo and got about halfway through the process before I realized I was able to remove this with the turbo still in place. And here is the reason. This is the factory turbo, and this is the factory downpipe. Typically in the car, it is in this type of orientation. And as you can see, there is a flange at the end of the downpipe, and there is an eyelet for a bolt to go through. On this setup, a bolt goes through this eyelet, through the heat shield, and into the engine block. And that's to give additional stability so that there's more than just the two screws underneath that hold the turbo to the motor mount arm. So as I work towards getting this car reassembled, the first job I'm going to tackle is getting in that heat shield. And I'm afraid I made a little bit of a boo-boo.
I'm pretty sure that you've messed up.
And that is, I don't remember exactly what steps I had gone through to be able to get the heat shield out.
It's because you're a human.
I'm starting to think I had removed this heat shield here as well to be able to get access to slide it through. And as you can see, this does not fit through as it stands. So I'm gonna try to get underneath the car and see if I can slide it up from underneath somehow. And if not, I'm going to have to remove this again and see if I can slide it down behind. So in order to better explain this, let's get underneath the car and hopefully you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. So here we are underneath the car, and just so you can get your bearings, here is the oil pan, here is the crossover tube, and this is the driver's side control arm. So there is a little gap here. You can see here's where the crossover tube comes down. And right there, you can see where the downpipe attaches to the exhaust. That point there is where the factory bracket goes that attaches to the block, right there. And I can already tell that there's no way I'm gonna be able to fish it up from underneath. So it looks like I'm gonna have to take off that other heat shield with the support for the wiring harnesses and try to snake that heat shield back down through. So I went back and I checked some of the video footage from episode 1 in this mini series on this 944 Turbo, and I definitely had removed those two heat shields. So let me go into more detail about what I'm talking about. So when I looked at the footage, I had already removed not only this vacuum manifold, but also this heat shield right here, that both the starter to alternator wiring harness as well as the main DME wiring harness bolts to. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to retrace some of my steps and remove this vacuum manifold again, as well as this heat shield. Shouldn't take me too long. It's just a couple of 10mm bolts, but they are kind of a pain in the butt to get to, especially the ones right here and right there. but I did it before and I'll just have to do it again. So we'll see if maybe I can just push this stuff off to the side, but if not, I might just go ahead and remove them again. So I've got the heat shield out and I was able to move the vacuum manifold over a little bit. I really hate to backtrack, but sometimes that happens, and that's just part of working on cars in general. Sometimes you make mistakes, sometimes you forget which way things happen. But it only took a couple of minutes to get those off, so now you can see I should have a little bit more room to snake that AOS heat shield down inside that gap. So let's hope I can get it back in just as easy as I got it out. And there it is. The key was to put the forwardmost facing side down in first, and it really just fell right down in there. So now it's time to get underneath the car. I do need to fish the O2 sensor wire out. It normally goes up behind that heat shield, so it'll be easier to do that when I'm underneath the car, and I will get it temporarily in place with one of the bolts because there is another part that also mounts underneath there, and I'll show you that in a minute. So there's the heat shield just kind of set in place. That's not where it normally goes, but I'm not going to be able to film getting my hand up in there and getting a bolt in, but I'm going to run the O2 sensor wire behind there and get at least one of the bolts in, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so you should see right there, I have that 13mm bolt started going through the heat shield. And I don't know, it might be a little dark for you guys to see, but I also have the O2 sensor harness wire right there going underneath the heat shield, and I will connect it to the crossover pipe later once I get another bracket that needs to go right there as well. And I'll go up top to show you what that bracket is and what it's supposed to do. And that's this bracket right here. And this is actually a support for the backside of the intake manifold. It actually mounts right back here and goes in the other hole with a 13mm bolt that also passes through that AOS heat shield. Now, this normally has 2 bolt holes on it, but it looks like an entire section of this has been cut off. So there's usually a bolt hole here and one that would normally be right here, and this bracket comes out like that. But it looks like this has been cut off at some point, which actually is a little bit of a benefit, because what I will do is I will leave it loose down below, and it makes it a lot easier to line up these holes with the back of the intake manifold. So with that being said, I'm at least going to get 1 bolt through on the bottom, and then I'm going to move to getting the vacuum manifold and that heat shield put back so I can essentially get back to where I was when I first started the video. So after some backtracking, I got that brace hooked back in. I have the vacuum manifold installed, and here is that intake manifold brace. You can see it actually bolts to this heat shield as well as down to the block. Like I said before, normally there's 2 bolts holding this on, plus there's normally 2 bolts right here. So your typical Porsche mantra, when 1 or 2 bolts is fine, let's put in 4 just to make it more difficult. You can also see that here is the line for the O2 sensor. It does slip between the air oil separator and this heat shield to keep it protected from the heat from the downpipe. I do have the bolts loose for the AOS heat shield and that brace, just so when I get the intake manifold on, it's a lot easier to line up those bolt holes with what's on the back of the intake manifold. And I know this looks like a whole lot of mess. I promise that after I get a little bit more installed, I'll have this cleaned up and it makes a lot more sense. Plus, when the intake manifold is on, all of that is covered. But I do plan on some strategic use of zip ties to keep everything in a little bit more of an organized fashion. And now on to the next bit of assembly. And what I'm going to tackle next might seem a little bit out of order, but what I want to do is I want to get this J-boot installed. And the sole reason for it is the larger inlet on this Evergreen Raptor X Turbo requires a larger J-boot with a larger inlet. And because of the larger J-boot, it makes it very difficult because there's not a lot of space between the top of the alternator and this coolant hose for the turbo. So what I want to do is, while I have a lot of this stuff disassembled, try to get the J-boot installed. And I may even remove this coolant hose because I've already drained the coolant in a previous episode, to hopefully allow enough room for me to get my fingers under there to make sure that the J-boot is fully seated on this inlet. So this is going to be a lot of cramming fingers in where there's not a lot of room, but I want to get this done and over with now, so let's get on it. J-boot is on and secured, and I was able to get my fingers underneath there and make sure that the J-boot was fully seated all the way around the inlet, and I have the clamp tightened down. Now, I did have to put on a new clamp because the clamp that I had on it was this style that has kind of like the more European style. It was definitely stripped. So I have found that with these silicone style hoses and boots, that sometimes the slotted style seems to hold on a little bit better because these silicone type hoses seem to have a springy rebound to them, and it just almost seems like to me that they have a tendency to come loose over time or strip out if you try to get them too tight. So at least for this size one, this is actually a little bit wider as well. It is definitely on there and not coming off, so hopefully should not have any leaks there. So I also put on this rubber charge pipe hose, so just to get that in and out of the way and taken care of. I also started to kind of route a little bit more of like the vacuum lines and stuff like that, just to try to get things in its general vicinity, because I am almost ready to put on that intake manifold, which is extremely exciting. But that will come on the next video, where I really start to button up the finishing touches on getting this 944 Turbo running again. So if you found this video helpful, or you enjoyed it or found it entertaining, please give it a like. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be alerted when I drop the next video on this project 944 Turbo. And also leave a comment below. Let me know if you have a 944 Turbo and you've struggled trying to get your air oil separator out and had to basically remove the turbo just to be able to change the O-rings. So I greatly appreciate all of you that have stuck around this long in this video, and I'll catch you on the next one.